Okay, so this is going to be a continued discussion regarding treatment and recovery. The last segment discussed what recovery is. We're going to pick up on that, touch base a little bit more on what treatment is supposed to do, and then we'll start talking about acceptance. Okay, so in the last, welcome back to Addiction Alliance programming. Last couple segments we've talked about treatment and treatment barriers, and we've talked about treatment being a flight towards health is what we call it in my line of work. Folks start to understand that they need to make change, so they're going to need help, and we're going to talk about the role of support. This idea that it's really difficult to make the change from using a whole lot of substances to not using a whole lot of substances. Most people have tried to do that on their own. And it's pretty clear that the reason people are in a room of treatment or checking out this material on the internet is because they found that basically you can't do it alone. So we're going to talk about the role of support, what that looks like. Treatment is, well, professional support. Now a lot of folks they say, well, I'm going to go to 12 steps to quit using. That's not professional treatment, but it has been shown to be effective with a certain people. But treatment, professional treatment, is professional support, and it looks like anything from outpatient individual counseling to outpatient group work to intensive outpatient programming. To inpatient programming, residential. So you've got these different levels of care. All of them fall under the umbrella of professional treatment, which is to say support in helping you, reach your goals and objectives. So we talked about the barriers to treatment, both internal and external. A great barrier to treatment is motivation. Deciding to go to treatment, and when you're in treatment, actually getting something out of it, that requires motivation. The motivation to deal with distractions, the motivation to manage anxiety, depression, ADHD, whatever that looks like. A lot of folks are looking at this material online, because they might not have the motivation. Fear saps the motivation or the ability to kind of get up and make a phone call and get into treatment. So for a lot of folks who are watching this online, this programming might motivate them to go get further help at a treatment center. So treatment is about healing. We call it the flight towards health. I'm tired of living this way. I can't live this way anymore. I might die. So I need some help, so I'm going to go to treatment. And then you have to work through the barriers when you're at treatment. And treatment leads to recovery, which we started talking about in last segment. Recovery is healing. Now, recovery has always been billed as, they call it abstinence-based recovery. The vast majority historically, or the largest component historically of recovery has been abstinence. And a lot of treatment programs and a lot of folks envision recovery as starting and ending with abstinence. I'm just going to quit using. I'll figure out how to quit using. And that's my recovery, and that's that. And what I've noticed over the years, and what I noticed in my own life, is if you begin and end with abstinence, you're much more likely to relapse. If you begin your recovery and end it, kind of like in terms of a framework or a foundation, if it starts and ends with abstinence, if abstinence is the depth and breadth of your recovery, you are much more likely to relapse. Because what you're doing is the only problem you're identifying is the behavior of using substances. That is a very superficial view of recovery, and it's not enough, quite frankly. We talk about the Addiction Alliance programming, attempting ambitiously to be better, to be more, to be holistic, which means a whole lot of different parts. It's based on this idea that abstinence is a first step to recovery, But it's just the first step. Abstinence opens up the opportunity to dig deep and find out what the underlying conditions, the underlying dynamics of the substance use disorder are. So recovery, in our methodology, is a much broader view of a human being's life. We don't just look, say you started using it at age 13 and now you're 30, that's a 17-year span. Our view of recovery isn't just looking at those 17 years and seeing what's going on and all these experiences, and then we're going to use those as a springboard towards recovery. Recovery looks at your entire life, dating back to being in utero, and also looking at generations back to see what's going on in your family genetically and epigenetically, and we will get to that. So it's a much broader view of a human being's experience, and I'm trained as a social worker, not necessarily the kind of social worker that works at DSS or CPS. I'm what is called a clinical social worker, and I'm trained to give therapeutic support to folks for mental health and trauma and substance use disorder, but I'm trained with a background of what is called biopsychosocial spiritual. A human being's way of life is biopsychosocial spiritual. Those are 4 dimensions in a human being's life. A human being can't be viewed in the vacuum of their mental health, or in the vacuum, the one dimension of their physical health. We have to look at a human being in their environment with those 4 dimensions, and how their environment and their psychosocial interactions with their environment and other human beings has impacted and created the conditions where addiction, so-called, arises. So recovery means that we have to look at these different parts of our life, and their insight is required. You have to gain insight into who you are, and how your physical health is, how your mental health is, how your social health is, how your spiritual health is, how drugs and alcohol have impacted you biopsychosocially and spiritually, and how recovery addresses your biopsychosocial spiritual way of life. In other words, we need to learn to take care of ourselves in mind, body, and soul. Using drugs and alcohol is a way of life. It impacts you biopsychosocially and spiritually. It impacts your physical health, your mental health, your social health, and your spiritual health. Using drugs and alcohol is self-harm. And the way of life of recovery, because recovery is a way of life, is to practice self-care biopsychosocially and spiritually. We need to figure out in treatment and moving forward a million different ways of practicing self-care. Most folks come into treatment or go to meetings thinking, I gotta quit using drugs and alcohol, and that's where it begins and ends. They don't consider things like exercise, sleep, and nutrition. They don't consider things like moving forward from my date of abstinence 30 days ago, 30 minutes ago, whatever, the last time you used. I gotta figure out how to take care of my body, because if my body's in poor health, it's going to cause stress and suffering, and that's going to make me use. And we're going to get to the role of stress and suffering in substance use disorder, but that's what it looks like. Folks may or may not understand the role of their mental health in triggering cravings to use. The role of relationships, your social self, your relationships, your view of yourself in society. If you have a history of incarceration, you may not be super comfortable in society, right? But we have a role in society. If you've been released, from juvie or from prison, or you're an agoraphobe and you're released from your home, we have a role in society. And if we don't understand that role, or if we fear or despise society, we're going to suffer, and that's going to make us more likely to use. And then, of course, the spiritual realm, or the spiritual dimension of our life, is very important in recovery. We'll talk a lot about spiritual principles. 12 Steps considers recovery to be a spiritual process, and it is in part. So we have to look at the biopsychosocial spiritual dimensions of our life, how drugs and alcohol affected those parts of our life, but also how those parts of our life developed our drug abuse. So we see this swirling symbiotic, almost chicken and egg cause and effect dynamic, where it's really unclear whether the drugs and alcohol cause the biopsychosocial spiritual dysfunction, or whether the biopsychosocial spiritual dysfunction caused the drug use. So we have to wrap our minds around which came first. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter, because we're going to figure out what to do about it. But people want to know, why did I start using drugs and alcohol like this, and why is it so hard to quit? We got to talk about the role of suffering in this. So recovery is about, again, on the one hand, figuring out why we're here, why we're in treatment, why we're watching these videos, why we are in this room, why. And then at some point we say, okay, now I understand, or I think I understand why, and you transition to, what am I going to do about it, so that I put myself in a position, a strong, confident position to where I'm likely to avoid relapse, and I'm likely to develop a recovery that is really sustainable and I can rely on. And we will discuss that moving forward very shortly about why am I here. In the meantime, I want to discuss the role of acceptance in our understanding of recovery. And to talk about the role of acceptance, we have to talk about the role of pain and suffering in life. And what I will say to that end is that pain is a part of life. It's something you can count on day in and day out, whether it be physical pain or whether it be emotional pain, or both, because physical pain leads to emotional pain. Pain is a part of life. You can look to the wisdom of the ages for that. Listen to any country and western song and you can hear a whole lot of heartbreak and pain and suffering. Pain is omnipresent. As you get older, you get more physical pain. Many people have chronic pain. And then, of course, adversity. Was watching football last night, and one of the football players was talking about, it was the Commanders player that was shot during the offseason, Robinson Jr.
Robinson Jr.
Yeah, he grew up in Tuscaloosa, apparently. By the way, say hi to him if you know him. Young man grew up in Tuscaloosa, and he talked in the interview about the adversity he had faced in his life. Adversity means you've experienced trauma. And traumatic experiences, whether it be a weather event, an act of God, a terrorism event, an act of violence, or chronic adverse childhood experiences like abuse and neglect, that creates mental, emotional, and cognitive suffering, because there's a lot of pain that's involved with those experiences. So pain is omnipresent, and what happens, there's a pretty simple non-mathematical equation that DBT talks about. Pain in life, when you practice acceptance, pain is manageable. Pain plus acceptance equals normal, ordinary, manageable pain. So you stub your toe and it hurts like the devil, and you say, well, I just did that, and the pain goes away quicker. If you stub your toe and then you say, oh my God, this is the 1,000th time I've stubbed my toe this week, what is wrong with me? The pain is going to be intensify, and it's going to cause more suffering, because now you've added self-loathing and self-blame to the mix. So pain plus acceptance, in other words, this is happening and I need to deal with it, equals manageable pain. Pain plus non-acceptance, aka denial. I can't believe this is happening to me. This shouldn't be happening to me. Why is this happening to me? Pain plus non-acceptance or denial equals suffering. And one thing I know about the human condition for certain is that human beings will only tolerate a certain amount of suffering before they break. Human beings that practice acceptance can undergo incredible amounts of pain. I've read stories about people breaking multiple bones in their back and in their legs, mountain climbing, and accepting that fact, and then surviving by crawling down these mountains. If you are injured anywhere and you just say, well, I can't handle this, you're likely to suffer and probably give up. You will break psychologically. when people suffer and they don't practice acceptance, they will break. Their psyche will break and they will give up. They will lose hope and faith. And that is a very dangerous condition. Suffering is what we really need to consider when we are discussing substance use disorder, trauma, mental health, treatment, and recovery. Recovery is about identifying pain, managing it, and reducing suffering. And it is the goal of this program to help people understand that. And it is the theory of this program to show folks who want to know why they are here the role of suffering in their life. And it's different for everyone. I have people tell me all the time, oh, I had a great childhood. And sometimes when we go into it a little bit, it turns out they had a safe childhood. But a lot of times when people say, oh, I had a great childhood, and then we start talking about it, it's very questionable whether that childhood really was very great or safe. And there's this idea of denial that, oh, no, nothing really bad happened to me, when in reality there was a lot of traumatic suffering there. I meet adults, young adults, middle-aged adults, and elderly adults who are suffering daily due to events that happened years, decades ago. We attach to a lot of things. Our minds, we're going to learn about how our minds work in this program. Our minds attach to things, and our minds attach to events, and our minds attach to the feelings and thoughts that develop from events. And they hold on, it's like flypaper. They stick to our minds like flypaper, or we hold on to them like Charlton Heston with his cold, dead fingers wrapped around his firearms. Remember that? At the NRA, he was like, y'all holding on to my guns, you have to pry them from my cold, dead hands. That's how our mind attaches to feelings and beliefs and thoughts and interpretations of historical events, things that have been done to us, things that we've done to others, things that we've experienced. We have to understand the role of suffering in the evolution and development of what is called substance use disorder. And once we understand the role of suffering and we understand the role of acceptance, we can begin to create a foundation of recovery. The foundation of recovery in our method, in our understanding of addiction, so-called, is acceptance. In fact, the greatest barrier to folks seeking treatment and benefiting from treatment is denial. I find that denial usually isn't something like a statement of I don't have a drug problem. Usually the denial is more like, I got a drug problem, but it's not that bad. Or I got a drug problem, but I can do it on my own. I can quit whenever I want. I hear that a lot. I can quit whenever I want. I only do a little bit of drugs. I can quit when I want. That's denial. We wouldn't be having that conversation if you could quit whenever you want. I get people calling me all the time and say, hey, can you teach me how to moderate drugs? I used to be able to moderate my drinking or my drugs, and now I can't seem to do it. And I want to get back to that place. And in my mind, I'm like, if we're having this conversation, you're not able to do that. It's progressed beyond that, and we need to talk about acceptance, accepting where you're at, the full depth and breadth of the problem. If you're watching or listening to this segment, or you're in the room, my guess is that you're late stage and that ship has sailed, and that the problem has been affecting you biopsychosocially, spiritually for some time, and now we got to do something about it. And in order to get to that place, you need to practice acceptance. You need to lay down your arms, give up fighting it, practice honesty and transparency with yourself and others, and begin to tell the truth of your life, which is probably going to involve a lot of difficult conversations with yourself or somebody about how it was coming up to be you as a kid, as a young adult, some of the things that happened, some of the experiences that led to anxiety and depression, and those links, those biopsychosocial, spiritual links in your life to where you're at. Everyone throughout their life, they think where they're at is just where they're at, and this is how they're going to be. Where you're at in your life is an evolution from when you were in your mother's tummy to where you are now, and it all ends up as this holistic story of who you are. We're going to talk about the role of narrative and story if you want to really understand the story of your life and then write the next chapter in recovery, the next chapter of your life is going to be recovery, and then we'll see how that goes. You got to practice acceptance, which means this is where I'm at, this is where I've been, no holds barred, this is who I am, and this is what I'm struggling with. Once you start to practice acceptance, and that builds that's the foundation of your recovery, then you get to approach the 3 pillars of recovery. And I'm going to pull this up a little bit so they can see a little better. The 3 pillars of recovery in our methodology is support, or the 3 pillars are support, stress management, and effort. Remember, we talked about treatment being seeking support. I hear this all the time. When I ask people to raise their hands, in fact, you could raise your hand if you've tried quitting drugs just by yourself, willpower, I'm just going to do it, before. I'll raise my hand. How did that work out? Not real well. So, folks, I think, most folks at some point in their life have seemed to have been somewhat successful, so to speak, in quitting using for a minute or an hour or a couple days, but they always seem to go back. And that leads me to believe that there's just no way we can do this by ourselves. In fact, that leads to the discussion of, is there anything you can do in life by yourself? I mean, I guess you can play solitaire. There are other pursuits that are done, behind closed doors by yourself. Most things in life are done with other people. We'll talk about the role of solitude, which means I'm gonna separate myself from other people just to carve out some me time and practice my skills and reduce my stress, do some meditation. If you're avoiding people because of anxiety or mental health, that's called isolation. Isolation and solitude, aside from that, everything else is done with other people, right? We have to accept that too. We have to accept. Acceptance leads to these 3 pillars. We have to accept that we need support. And this is really hard for a lot of people, men and women. I've heard people say, nope, I'm going to do this by myself. Other people are no good to me, and I appreciate your help, and I'm good. Okay. Probably be talking to you again if you survive. I was one of those people. I thought, no, nobody understands me. I can do this. I'm smarter than everyone, blah, blah, blah. I struggled for years denying that I needed support. And what we've tried to do in this program is figure out the best possible way to be supported. Combination of group treatment, maybe some individual treatment, at some point definitely some individual counseling, and then different forms of socialization. Support looks like professional support. It also looks like support from peers, like-minded individuals who are trying to do the right thing, and then cultivating support from community members, friends and family, and other community members that are willing to help you. What's the number one condition for support to actually work, for support to actually be supportive? It has to be supportive. So if you are being supported and you don't feel supported, we got to figure out what's going on there. Maybe you're not willing to accept the support, or maybe the support you're getting isn't very helpful. Like a family member telling you that really all you need to do is pray to God to quit and you should be fine. What do you need all this treatment for? That doesn't sound real supportive. Support needs to be supportive, and that's a two-way street. So support is the initial pillar of acceptance that leads to recovery. Then we talk about stress and stress management. You're going to see a link, a correlation, and a causation between stress and using drugs. We're going to talk about what stress is, how to identify it, and how to manage it, and how to reduce it from our lives. So we need to learn how to identify stress, how to manage it, how to reduce it, how to eliminate it, and then how to accept the stress that is just baseline in life. Okay, so life is stressful. Remember, Inspector Deck said that life is hectic, and he wasn't lying about that. We have to accept that. A lot of people don't accept the baseline elements of stress in our life. So that's not only part of why we're here, but it's also a huge part of what we're here for. We're going to learn that we are here largely because of stress response or stress reactivity. And then we're going to learn skills to manage stress. Teaser alert, that's called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And then finally, effort. The third pillar, acceptance leads to effort. Acceptance leads you to the understanding of, man, I got to do work. I can't just pop a pill and make this all go away. I can't just pray to God and make this go away. I mean, listen, no offense to folks who believe in the power of prayer, but I've heard people say, oh, I prayed to my God and I was redeemed and my addiction went away. And then when you dig deeper, they were doing a whole lot of other stuff, okay? Acceptance leads you to the understanding that you got to put work in. You got to work to manage the pain and suffering. You got to put the work in. Managing cravings is work. You know, it may not burn calories like digging ditches, but it is work. They call it digging into trauma. Like, you know, that's work. Because there's a reason we haven't addressed this before is because it's painful and it leads to suffering. When you practice acceptance, that pain remains pain and it allows you to do the effort. I'm a highly motivational guy. I'm not exactly known for my work ethic, but I am known for my motivation. And I will cheer you on and I will motivate you, but I can't do the work for you. And even if I could, it wouldn't help you because that would just make you learn helpless. You gotta do the work. The vulgar saying is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make that horse drink. And boy, ain't that the truth. That is the truth. You gotta do the work and no one's gonna do it for you. And we've all been there. We've all had, well, maybe most of us have had family members that think they've worked harder for us trying to help us. That don't work either. We'll call that codependency. We'll call that enabling. We'll call that enmeshment. We'll get to that down the road. Recovery is, the paradox of recovery is that it is a group effort, but it's also about self-reliance. And that's when they talk about how recovery is selfish. It's about self-reliance. The point of contact, the first line of defense, the first line of effort is you. The stress hits you and you use your skills and then maybe simultaneously you reach out for support. So you need support, but you also need to be self-reliant. If that sounds like a paradox, wrap your mind around it because recovery is full of paradoxes. Read the Tao Te Ching and you can learn all about paradoxes or Zen Buddhism. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I got to hit on that. I got something on my mind that's been really troubling me on my way to my doctor's appointment.
So, can we wait till the end of the segment and then we will address that because I'm about to wrap it up. So acceptance of everything, especially the behaviors. Acceptance leads to support. The idea that you need support leads to the idea that we need to manage our stress, and it leads to the conclusion or the conviction that we got to put in a whole lot of effort. That may look like going to a whole lot of meetings, but really what it looks like, there's a lot of effort in getting honest, being accountable, and coming to terms with developing an authentic self. You got a lot of people fronting out there like, oh, it ain't no big deal, I'm okay, I ain't got the problem, you got the problem, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we get real, we practice acceptance, and all of that just kind of dissolves. A good treatment facility will feel safe, and it'll be a place where you can trust the folks who are helping you out and your peers so that you can begin to practice acceptance and get real and honest. This is about trust and safety. What I find is that maybe it's a little easier when you're watching in video, but when someone comes to the building, it takes a little while for them to warm up, be trusting, and feel safe. Sometimes it takes weeks, and that's when we say, hey, stick around a little longer. And acceptance, support, stress management, and effort leads to recovery. And recovery is a way of life of all of the above. So we're setting the stage for some really great conversations, I hope, moving forward. Think about it, feel about it, ask questions about it. At some point, we'll probably get a tool for you to reach out and ask questions in real time to the Addiction Alliance team. But in the meantime, stick with your gut. If you're practicing acceptance, your intuition will take you a long way, and you can take that to the bank. You guys take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Go forth and prosper.
Thank you.